Excellent. Welcome back, everybody. And we will get started with our next session. So a couple of reminders. The session is being recorded. And you have an opportunity to ask questions of our next speaker through the Q&A tab there in Zoom. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Carleen Markey. Carleen is a PhD student in physics at Carnegie Mellon University by day and a women's hockey analytics researcher by night. Over the past 4 years, she's worked with all sorts of sports analytics data, ranging from the NHL to the CWHL to the PHF, and has spent the last season collaborating on projects with Chatham University women's ice hockey team and other groups with a focus on systems analysis and player development. The floor is yours, Carleen.
Hello. Welcome to my talk. Let me see if I can share my screen. Okay, I hope that's the right screen. Hi, I'm Carleen. Also, somebody tell me if it's the wrong screen. Anyway, hi, I'm Carleen. I am indeed a PhD student at Carnegie Mellon. I have been doing women's hockey analytics for about 3.5 years now. One of like a dozen of us. So I feel pretty qualified to make this talk happen. Today, I'm here to talk to you about being on the breakaway, accelerating the evolution of women's hockey analytics. Hello. Okay, so before we actually get started, I want to thank two incredibly wonderful people, Alyssa Longmire and Mike Murphy. Absolutely nothing in this presentation or in the current women's hockey analytics community would exist without either of their efforts or support. And both of them, frankly, never get enough credit as they deserve for being essentially the faces of women's hockey analytics. All right, so let's talk about why I'm actually giving this presentation. So as some of you may have noticed, women's hockey and sports analytics have been undergoing this exponential growth in the past few years at the exact same time. Women's hockey analytics is this wonderful interface between the two, where it's really easy to get some kind of momentum going as the two subjects feed into each other and evolve together. We're also seeing we're beginning to see some people hired from the community onto teams. So it's really important to keep maintaining that momentum if we want to continue that trend of integrating women's hockey analytics people onto women's hockey teams. And given Mike, Alyssa, and I are only 3 people, and all of us have real life jobs that are not hockey, I thought it was important to explicitly outline what are the next steps that are needed in terms of community building to maintain the momentum of women's hockey analytics. In the past year, we've been doing a lot of like soft skills community building stuff. So this has essentially ended up being the community building version of my last women's hockey analytics presentation called Contextualizing Historical Data in Current Projects in Women's Hockey, which you can check out that presentation at wackyhack.com/event archive. So from my perspective, the growth cycle of women's hockey analytics, or really any research in general, breaks down into 3 different parts. New data, which interests new people who produce novel projects, and novel projects that can create the demand for new data. Each of these parts is its own little cycle by itself, and the entire thing is glued together and kept going by all the parts being relatively accessible and keeping a really low bar of entry for the average women's hockey fan who can essentially make an Excel chart. So with this presentation, I'm going to walk us through each of these parts in terms of what we've been doing in the past, what we're doing currently, and what needs to be done in the immediate future for each subcycle, as well as the overall cycle of growth to keep it going and to accelerate its development to match the pace of growth in women's hockey overall. So let's talk about the data subcycle first, because I love data. So over the last 5 years, Mike and Alyssa primarily have been finding and compiling different data sources for the various leagues out there, which ranges from CWHL, the Olympics, the NCAA, the IIHF tournaments, the PHF, formerly the NWHL, the Swiss Women's Hockey League, and the PWHPA. It's a much larger undertaking than it sounds, given some of the data keeping practices of some of these organizations, but we've managed to compile it all onto either Mike's site, theirhockeycounts.com, or the website for the Women's Hockey Analytics Conference we put on last summer, wackyhock.com. So now that we've compiled a bunch of data, we're starting to run into logistical issues. The first that I want to talk about is actually the loss of access to NCAA data. CollegeHockeyStats.net went down last year, which leaves a huge void to fill. If you don't know what that website is, it's essentially, like all the data that the NCAA has spat out and organized onto this really nice, clean site. But the guy who was managing it for the last 20 years retired. So there's been this huge void to fill. And the Sports Dataverse, which is an initiative I'm part of that's looking to build scrapers and compile data for all sorts of different public data sources for all sorts of different leagues, is really looking to plug that gap, particularly in the NCAA access point by making a scraper for the NCAA site and associated websites. We've also been trying to lower the bar of entry in terms of working with this data, because a lot of this data needs to be scraped off of websites and such. So we've in the Sports Dataverse have been working on building the fast RHockey package, which collects PHF data and compiles it into nice CSVs and other easily workable formats. That was Ben Howe and Cyan Gilani. We put on the first Women's Hockey Analytics Conference last year, WackyHack, where we compiled all that data into one spot, and of course, Mike's website, Their Hockey Counts. Also, unfortunately, a big point of focus this year has been the PHF data quality. Over the course of 60 regular season games, there have been over 50 significant recording errors, ranging from duplicate goals, wrong penalties, the timestamps being blatantly wrong, players being wrong for goals and points and such, and the wrong goalie being in net despite that goalie not even being on the ice. Stats like block shots, takeaways, and giveaways are only tracked for some games for teams, and other teams just straight up don't do them altogether. So there's been a really inconsistent data management across the league there. And there actually have been 4 to 5 major data losses of entire periods in games. All the play-by-play data was lost for various reasons. Both fortunately and unfortunately, most of these errors are actually found and fixed by volunteers after the fact. So big shout out to them. But this is the way to fix this is much higher than just some volunteers in the public sphere finding it and fixing it. And honestly, this is not just the PHF having these problems. There are data integrity problems everywhere. The PWHPA gets scoring events wrong. NCAA and youth sports data can be unreliable or unavailable. The IHF has permanently lost some really valuable historical women's hockey data in a basement flood of all things. And honestly, who knows where the PWIH and other U18s leagues preserve their data. There's been so many players who have hit 100th game, 100th goal milestones, and no one's sure when it actually happened because no one was keeping track in the beginning. Or the player was listed in a game that they weren't actually in town for, or scoring events were misattributed. It's really disappointing that these statistics that have such an impact on players' careers and now future livelihoods with investment in these leagues. It's a shame that they get treated like this. A goal or a game played can be the difference between a player making enough money to stop working a second job or not. So the statistical stakes are just higher in women's hockey than in any other version of the game played. Thankfully, there's a simple solution to this. Pay people to take care of league data. I promise that the majority of these problems go away once you pay a couple of college students $15 and some pizza to track games and keep some spreadsheets in Dropbox. You can't always cultivate investment in women's hockey statistics organically, so you need to pay people to care. Those of us in the public women's hockey analytics sphere can care all we want, but it's very hard to make a dent in the sheer number of errors given the proportionally very small number of us out there and the fact that we all work not like full-time non-hockey jobs or full-time students. Additionally, professional players deserve professional statistics. Every single major women's hockey organization, the PHF, the PWHPA, the IHF, the NCAA, U Sports, et cetera, needs to hire someone to standardize the data and preserve it in a manner that will actually stand the test of time and any other future basin floods. So obviously, some of us are doing this as a hobby and can't hire anyone to take care of any data. So here's how you as a member of the public can help on the data front. Currently, we don't have any kind of accessible statistics for the season of the PWHPA, the Swedish Women's Hockey League, the Finnish Women's Hockey League, and U Sports. All four of these organizations have current or future Olympians playing in them, so it's relatively important to find and make that data public going forward. There's also no public play-by-play data for the PWHPA, the Swedish Women's Hockey League, or the Finnish Women's Hockey League, or the Swiss Women's Hockey League, the Olympics, the IHF, or U Sports, which is a lot. I know play-by-play data exists for at least 3 of these organizations, so it's honestly worth trying to hunt down where that exists and making it public and accessible. Finally, this is a little bit of a wish list item for me personally, and honestly, without even getting into like the labor side of it, it's useful to have player salary info available to the women's hockey analytics community generally, just because that we've seen in the NHL, analysts can relatively easily make accurate market projections for player contracts with that kind of data. There's also a bunch of other things that people in both the private and public sectors can do to help with data. For the leagues, teams, and private data providers out there, over the last few months, it's become clear to me that there is some kind of efficiency or miscommunication between teams/leagues and private data providers. Teams are having volunteers track shots on goal despite having access to that through those data providers, and also advanced stats beyond that. And players, coaches, and hockey ops people are asking people in the public analytics sphere about where to find their stats and data. If there's data readily available for those leagues, people like Mike, Alyssa, and I have somehow become the unpaid experts on where to find it and how to access it, which honestly, it takes away from our time doing fun things like fantasy hockey, making visualizations, and actually doing in-depth analysis pieces. So here's how to help us in the public sphere if you are behind the scenes. If you're on a team, pay us to help you find it and figure out how to use it. If you're a part of an organization's front office or data provider for the PHF, the PWHPA, the NCAA, U Sports, or the IHF, please make sure your players, coaches, and hockey ops people know how to find the team or league advanced stats, as well as player microstats via Stathletes, InStat, SportLogic, Iceberg, whatever. Crucially, if you're involved with the front office of the PHF, PWHPA, the NCAA, U Sports, it's also crucial to make sure that your players, coaches, hockey ops people know how to submit basic recording corrections, such as misattributed scoring events, wrong goalies listed in net, player list on the wrong team, name spelled wrong, etc. Really basic stuff. Those of us in the public sphere can't catch all of these types of errors, nor do we know how to actually get those corrections to happen on the player's behalf, other than like emailing the one person we know at the league. So as stated before, it's taking some of the burden off of the unpaid public to review the accuracy of that data makes everyone's lives easier and allows us to make cooler stuff and prettier visualizations that everyone wants to see. Okay, so moving from the data side to the people side. So in the past, we've essentially found each other through the timeline and built community essentially through DMs and having conversations through those mediums. Though Alyssa Longyear has been doing some really awesome Twitch streams over the last couple of years and has brought in people either intentionally or unintentionally to the community by streaming her projects. And I want to make the point that there is not really the critical mass that in women's hockey analytics that men's hockey analytics has. So we've really had to make these kind of platforms work by being an accessible, welcoming community and proactively reaching out to people to keep doing women's hockey analytics work. So, and because that men's hockey analytics model of community building doesn't really work, we've been trying other things. So we've been continuing to build community on Twitter and really using it as the main introduction point for people and projects. The Big Data Cup last year was a really great entry point to introduce people to data and lower that bar of entry by, not needing to deal with any of the scraping, and also having some really cool data that I really liked working with. And I'm sure a lot of people liked working with and we're curious about. The Sports Dataverse has also been a really great pool of available people to help with technical tasks, like the scraping or, helping out with some of the harder visual parts of visualization or modeling. And Net Growth, the podcast that Alyssa, Mike, and I have started, has really been a way to try to platform people and their projects and being a lower bar of entry to people who are curious about women's hockey analytics or hockey analytics in general. And again, this is all held together by being a welcoming community and really making a deliberate effort to connect with people. So in terms of next steps and next parts of this cycle, I really think that creating positions and research or obvious research / visualization niches to fill encourages people to keep breaking into the community and keep making space for themselves. Creating common spaces, it really, like the Sports Dataverse, Twitter and Net Growth, which is an associated Discord for it. Creating these common spaces makes it obvious what the community is missing and what's needed to move forward in this cycle. And it makes it easier to find people or for people to find these voids and figure out how to fill it themselves and taking that proactive step. The Big Data Cup this year, which is all women's hockey data, I'm very pleased about. It really creates space for people without forcing them to carve out a space for themselves. It's like you give people data that's easily accessible, that's really cool, and they'll do what they want with it, right? Instead of having to tell them, hey, here's some data, we kind of need something here, and then they have to chip away for a place in the community and get their voice heard and stuff. And the Big Data Cup has been a really great way and will be a really great way for people who have those kinds of skills and great ideas to get platforms and seen. And lastly, the last part of this is really creating private side buy-in to create positions on that side, as well as which brings in people from the women's hockey analytics community and the public to the private side, which creates voids to fill in the public side. So for instance, if someone's doing visualizations and heat maps and stuff, and they get hired into a team position, suddenly there's a niche to fill in terms of making heat maps and other things, which is a pretty easy niche to fill for someone to just step into that role. And in fact, that kind of public to private transition has already happened. There's been at least 9 people who have done something in the public women's hockey analytics sphere and then moved on to some kind of paid sports analytics work. This includes Michael with Marlett, Spencer at Princeton, Alyssa formerly with the Australian Ice Hockey League, there we go. Mike formerly with the NWHL, now PHF, Megan with Stathletes, Jack Hahn with the Connecticut Whale, Dave with Sarnia Sting, Matt with the Sabres, and Jake with the Houston Rockets. And the people obviously create those projects. And in terms of the project cycle, we really started off, we as being the women's hockey analytics community, really started off using the men's hockey analytics model, which gave us this really great running start of creating visualizations. It's heat maps, location visualizations, play-by-play tracking visualizations, scoring visualizations, comparison tools, and really just replicating the research that had been happening, like Corsi, game score, translation factors, aging curves, scoring efficiency, possession, and just dipping our toes into developing our own kind of metrics, like Mike's steady metric. This is also something that's easier to do than just making up research on your own, because there's already a framework for it, there's already methodology, and it gains attention because of the easy cognitive jump between people doing men's hockey analytics and going oh, I know what that is. I can understand that just by looking at it. However, this lacks on the accessibility part because it was all being platformed on Twitter. Twitter, you just tweet out your project, it'll get like a bunch of retweets and likes over like the course of a day or two, but after that, it just drops off the face of the earth. So that's something we've been really lacking in the past. And this is something I personally was trying to concentrate on working on the community this year, is platforming projects. The first kind of initiative that I was trying to fix that, I guess, or the thing I was trying to do to fix this platforming issue was kind of reviving meta hockey, which has been slowing down in the past couple of years on the men's hockey analytics side, just because there hasn't been as much publicized work. So I took the initiative to, over the last 6 months, create this archiving effort to both collect and put onto Med Hockey over 100 women's hockey analytics projects. So you should go check that out there if you are interested in learning what we've been doing in the past few years before you start your Big Data Cup work. And also, me, Mike, and Alyssa have started Net Growth to try to defeat the transience of Twitter posted projects. Because it's a podcast, we're both giving like a lifetime to this project beyond just like the Twitter lifetime of 2 days, and also providing what the best we can of peer review and other feedback, and also some really intense cheerleading if you need it. Another way that we've been trying, or really Mike and Alyssa have been successful at platforming projects is creating stats-based articles on traditional platforms. Like we said, we don't really have the critical mass that men's hockey analytics does, so we have to use more traditional means of platforming. Mike put out a really good article on the Ice Garden a couple months ago, looking at pretty much like the leading point getters across all of the women's hockey leagues using a previous project, developing translation factors between leagues. Alyssa and Haley Salvian put out a stats-based article on The Athletic, and Alyssa wrote this really awesome game score based article for 538, looking at game score evolving through the different Olympics. So we also wanted to try to stimulate project development beyond just like the replication of men's hockey projects. And the two big ways that this happened last year was the Big Data Cup and the Women's Hockey Analytics Conference. There were over 20 Big Data Cup submissions using women's hockey last year, which is the most this community has ever seen at once. Wacky Hack also had a dozen new public projects with hundreds of eyes on it via Twitch streaming. And this has really been the biggest step we've taken in terms of like project development. And I'm really excited what we're going to see here out of the Big Data Cup and Wacky Hack, because it's only going to get better. So the next step on the project development side, first, I think, is just participating in Big Data Cup. Something we've been hearing a lot from the organizers of the Big Data Cup today and yesterday was bringing in new ideas from different sports. It's really important to cross-pollinate, and participating in the Big Data Cup when you don't have that much hockey experience can do that, and I think that's really awesome. That kind of brings me to my next point of, I think it's really important for us as a women's hockey analytics community to do exploration of analytics with unique spins. For instance, I'm stealing this example, I guess, from the men's side of hockey analytics Twitter, but Mio at Flyers Witch on Twitter, who's this wonderful hockey artist, made this really wonderful art piece based on Micah McCurdy's playoff projection visualizations. And I think it's a really, non-traditional way to showcase analytics. And I think this is something that everybody can contribute to, hockey analytics in general, because something like this brings in new people, gets new eyes on it, and helps people understand analytics in, a way that, their brain might not be so aligned to the math part of it, but you can sure interpret an art piece, we all can. And if anyone needs like some specific direction to go in, because I know I need that sometimes, the specific niches that I think need to be filled in the next couple months, years, is the first is game visualizations. This is something that particularly Alyssa used to do, and I got my start in just making visualizations for PHF or PWHPA games. No one's really doing that right now because we've been focusing on this community building and some of the longer form projects. Also, understanding analytical differences between men's and women's hockey. Over the last year or two, we've been starting to see evidence that the men's and women's hockey are not played the same way, both from shot location, number of passes before a shot, face-offs. It's starting to become evident that to the analytics side, I'm sure if you coach, it's a different story, but they're played differently. And I think that has a really big analytical impact that we don't necessarily understand right now. And the last thing is player development. Jack Hahn and Belfry Hockey on Twitter had this really great exchange about a month ago, explaining that no one's done any kind of hockey analysis on U18 women's players. And considering that the NCAA is essentially one of the highest, or not, if not the highest tier of women's hockey as is in terms of quality of play, it's really important to understand how players get there and what skills and what makes a player successful in the NCAA as they're coming out from U18 leagues. Finally, continuing on that front of making projects visible and accessible. We're continuing that with Wacky Hack and the Big Data Cup this year. But my 3 goals are also first, improving meta hockey, because as it stands, meta hockey is great. I love having all the projects in one place, but it's hard the website is hard to navigate. It doesn't really encapsulate all the definitions of article, I guess, because a lot of women's hockey stuff just gets posted on Twitter. No one really writes a whole blog post about it, or someone just writes or puts up some graphs or like a visualization tool, and that doesn't get archived properly because there's not a space for it on meta hockey. So if anyone has web design skills, message me if you want to platform hockey analytics projects. I do have the blessing of the meta hockey founders, so I'm not just going rogue on this, I promise. The second thing is to listen to new projects that we should chat about on Net Growth. It's a really easy way to just tune into the conversation that's happening in the women's hockey analytics community. And if you want, join the Discord to have those kinds of conversations. And the last thing is, honestly, if you want your projects visible and accessible, one of the easiest ways to do it is just at me, Alyssa, or Mike on Twitter with your projects. I love sharing projects, as evidenced by my last presentation and this presentation, and I will make sure that I will drop it in every channel I have access to and get eyes on it. Okay, to wrap everything up, because I think I'm running a little bit over. The public sphere action items are for, your homework, I guess, is to use the women's hockey data in the Big Data Cup if you can. Explore other data that can be found on wackyhack.com/data, but make some graphs, integrate some stats into an article, put your own unique spin on it, and fill an issue too. Help get those data sources to the public that I listed. Reach out to your local women's team to help with stats or track some shots, and wonderful shot plotter. I put that on the slide because I love it, and I think everyone should use it. And also get involved with Net Growth. Help out with the second version of meta hockey that's coming down the line, or join the sports dataverse to help with the more technical sides of this. And those of you in the private sphere, I did not forget about you. For your first piece of homework is to pay people to take care of women's hockey data. You do nothing else. If you do only one thing only, this is it. I want you to do this. Hire people or hire women's hockey analytics experts to do women's hockey stats things. Spinning off of that, integrate stats into articles, write-ups, and video analysis, even if it's just like points, shots on goal. Still helpful to get people to buy in. Introduce women's hockey players, coaches, GMs to hockey analytics concepts to create that kind of buy-in and space for us on the private side. And also make sure those people know how to find their stats. Very important. And lastly, if you want to listen to Net Growth and keep up with what the community is doing on the public side, or just follow people on Twitter, that's also a really good way to do it. And if you can, help get data sources to the public. And because that's a lot of things and that's hard to remember, let's play some bingo. I put down pretty much the generalized version of most of those bullet points onto this bingo card. And I don't have a prize for it, but if you get a blackout or any kind of bingo, send it to me. I will give you a thumbs up or a retweet or something. I don't know. And yeah, I hope you've figured out some kind of niche you can fill. And I look forward to seeing everyone's stuff on Twitter, I guess. Yeah. Anyway, thank you for listening to my talk.
Thanks so much for that, Carly. That was great. Especially like the shout out to collegehockeystats.net, which is actually or was formerly run by my neighbor in town.
I had no idea.
Tim Danahy. So that's great. But also lots of other really good stuff in there. Got time for, I think, one question for you. And so there's a question on milestones that women's hockey analytics needs to hit. And I think you really nailed that at the end of your talk there. So I'm going to go to the other question here in our queue, which is there's not much hockey data from European leagues, except for sort of the traditional box score statistics. Ideas about maybe how to get people or teams or leagues involved in generating event data or tracking data for those leagues?
There's really two ways that I have seen this buy-in kind of work. The first is kind of top down, is getting, I think I heard this on the panel earlier today with Jeremy, Ian, and Alex, is really just asking what GMs and what coaches need. And like, what are you curious about? In my experience, just like asking coaches what they're curious about is a great way just to generate that data yourself with the public tools out there, and showing them that, hey, these are questions we can answer with data in a non-traditional ways. And it helps create the demand for it. The second idea is really just have people go rogue and just start tracking things themselves, which has both happened for the NHL and the PHF, where people have just started tracking scoring events or shots or passes by themselves, and showing that there are actionable insights from these like data analysis projects. So I guess that comes down to like show people there are actionable insights from these things, and the data demand will follow. Like it's like I described in the first part of that cycle. Creating novel projects and creating the demand for it creates the demand for data, right? And it follows the cycle, I guess.
That's great. And thanks again for that presentation, Carly. That was great.
Thank you.
Our next